everybody, welcome to another video. I wanted to start today's video with a quote from a friend of a friend who said, "I love clearing house. There's such a wisdom in deciding what's worth keeping." Today's video is going to be maybe a little bit of a ramble. Might not be as straightforward as some of the others, but I wanted to start from this beautiful quote. It's from an article from an old precious friend of mine from back home named Ali Tadros. And I'll link to Ali's work and the article this quote first appeared in. It's on Substack, and I'll put that in the description. But I wanted to start here with this quote because honestly, I've been meaning to talk about it for a while now. I love clearing house. There's such a wisdom in deciding what's worth keeping. So I happen to have read that quote when I was last clearing my own house here. I came back from some travels. I wanted to kind of do some spring cleaning and clean out the house. And I was trying to decide, what things was I going to keep and what things was I going to clear out or get rid of or give away or sell. And I do find that there's this sort of maturity and this quiet contemplation that comes when you're picking an item up and deciding, is this something worth keeping in my life going forward, or am I willing to let it go? Am I willing to let this move on and move on outside of my life going forward? And it's almost like renunciation. What things am I willing to move on from? And that almost also reminds me a bit of like Marie Kondo, when you think about going through your closets and looking at your items and making a choice whether to keep something or not. So the Buddhists have this idea, this concept called renunciation. And when I first heard renunciation very early on, when I was first starting to meditate and first starting to read about Buddhism, the term renunciation didn't sit well with me, because it reminded me of things that I should not do. It was almost like this Judeo-Christian dictate that was like, you shall not do X, Y, and Z, and those kinds of commandments didn't really sit well with me. And it felt almost like you have to abstain from things with willpower, which didn't quite sit with me really well either. It felt like it was going to be a challenge. It was difficult. And so these precepts are all around non-harm in Buddhism. And there's 5 precepts which you can take on. The first is no killing, which of course includes murder, but also includes animals, food, that kind of killing for killing of other life forms, bugs, etc. So no killing, no theft or fraud or forgery, no sexual misconduct. Number 4, no lying or hurtful speech. And number 5, which was the one that sort of stuck out to me, no intoxication. No drugs, no alcohol. So again, many of these didn't feel that tempting to me, but things like intoxication felt like a God-given right. Like, why should I not have the right to get fucked up if I want to? And so this thought of renunciation felt very much like an instruction and very much like a commandment, like I said. And so my first reaction to hearing someone saying you can't drink alcohol or you can't take drugs was, well, fuck you. I mean, this is something that I like to do, or something that I have the right to do. But a Buddhist teacher explained this to me, and what renunciation really means is letting go. It's not abstaining from, or again, that willpower commandment not to be able to, but it's letting go. And that had a very different connotation. This idea of letting go means, you make your own choice about the things that are not worth keeping in your life. So I remember hearing a talk by Eckhart Tolle. So Eckhart Tolle is a writer of The Power of Now and A New Earth, 2 books that I've been reading recently again, especially A New Earth, and it's just profoundly resonant for me. It really, really has struck a chord lately as I'm reading it again. But Eckhart Tolle had a talk on YouTube. I think someone asked him a question about drugs or alcohol, And he mentions that, yeah, he enjoys a glass of wine with dinner occasionally. It's not he doesn't see it as a big deal. Um, but there comes this point in a meditation practice where, or in a spiritual practice, spiritual life, when you've had a glimpse of enlightenment. You've had a moment. I think the term is satori, is what the Zen masters, or the Japanese term for this flash of enlightenment. And so in a spiritual practice, over time, you get to this place where you realize you have this expansive, spacious feeling. And from that place, there's this sort of knowing that comes when you then get drunk again, or get tipsy again, or start to partake in drugs again, where you're like, the reasons why I turned to this many times before, now that I've had this flash of openness and spaciousness, I don't need those things anymore. And it's not, and I don't want them anymore. It's kind of this shift in consciousness that happens, this shift with the relationship to a drug or alcohol. And when I heard that the first time, I was like, ring-a-ding-ding, like that's exactly how I feel. It's exactly the experience that I've had, where I've enjoyed drugs in the past, I've enjoyed alcohol in the past. And at some point in the spiritual practice, you enjoy sobriety so much, you enjoy this being alert and awake and connected to the moment, that the alcohol doesn't do for you what it once did, or it doesn't serve the purpose anymore. It doesn't numb the pain. If anything, it just feels like, I just don't really want that anymore. And that can go with any addiction, I think. That's this idea of with the spiritual practice and the sort of expansiveness that comes with your practice, you kind of come to realize a lot of the tricks that you use, or a lot of the tools that you use, it could be food or drugs or alcohol or any number of distractions, TV, anything that numbs the mind, they just don't serve the purpose anymore. And I think that's what that idea of renunciation, or again, to me, the better translation of letting go, really points to. Now, these moments, these flashes of enlightenment that I talked about, Eckhart Tolle talks about them as gaps. That sometimes your mind will be racing and racing and racing, and all of a sudden, between two thoughts, there's this gap, this opening of, wow, I haven't been thinking for a second, or I haven't been thinking for a moment. Or you could stop to look at a beautiful flower, or you're hiking through nature and you just take a moment to look out and you're like, oh my goodness, like, wow, the wonder, the wonder and the awe leads to a moment where your thinking stops. And that thinking stopping, there's like all of a sudden this sudden peace, this like eternal peace that you feel connected to. And then you return back to your thinking, you return back to your emotions, and the cloudiness happens again. But those moments, those gaps, are what give us the hope that there is something beyond this day-to-day, really noisy thinking, emotional life that we live. There's a different dimension that's deeper. And that's what Eckhart Tolle refers to as the gaps. And similarly, I experienced those gaps in my own practice over the years, or in moments in my life when I wasn't practicing. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's something going on there. And that's what led me to this inquiry and to this depth and to this practice. So all that to say is that those gaps are really quite fascinating. And Eckhart Tolle has some practices or advice for how you can tap into those gaps. One is to stare at nature, to spend time in nature, and to really give your full attention to something, like a flower or a tree or a waterfall or a brook or a pond or a bird. And if you really give your full attention, you realize that the thinking stops for a second, and that's the gap, or the emotion stops for a second. That's the gap. So these gaps provide the juice that can lead to the spiritual practice, that can lead to this place of letting go, of renunciation, of letting go of the things that don't serve you anymore. Another metaphor that Eckhart Tolle uses is this idea of an attic, or a room that's just crowded full of furniture. And this is another metaphor that really stuck with me over the years. is that thinks of it like you've got this attic, this room upstairs that's just crowded full of furniture. That's of course a metaphor for your mind. It's crowded full of old thoughts, heavy thoughts that seem like you can't even move them out anymore, and they've collected dust, and they're really taking up a lot of space. And this can be old emotions, and just it could even be physical, literal stuff that's in this room, just packed and crowded. And when you sit down to meditate, you kind of are thinking about this piece of furniture and that piece of furniture and how you might rearrange the room. But what Eckhart Tolle kind of is talking about is saying, just look up for a second, and instead of focusing on the furniture and the things and the forms in the room, contemplate the space itself, the spaciousness, the space. What is that air? What is the essence of that room? Is it with what's within those four walls? Does that spaciousness go beyond the walls? You can't quite point to space, but you know it's there. And that's sort of spirit, is another word for that. Spaciousness, that space is, what's the spirit of that room? What does that feel like? It's unrelated to the furniture. It's unrelated to the stuff that's crowding that room. It's the essence of that room is the space. Another metaphor he uses for this idea is the light in that room. You know, if it's dark in there and you walk in, you might be stumbling upon things. You might be running into things, or you don't know what's going on, and you flip the lights on, and the light fills that room, and it gives you a sense of what's happening in that space. You can't exactly point to the light itself. You know there's a light bulb or a source, but then the light that illuminates the room, well, that's spirit. That's the gap. That's this other dimension, this other space that gives that, that brings that spirit to light, that allows you to experience that space for what it is, not the furniture, not the things, because you can clear out all the things from that room, and yet the essence, the spirit of that room, of the space itself remains. And that's, again, a metaphor for our minds. Remove the thoughts, remove the heavy, burdensome objects and forms in there, and what remains is the space itself, and that's the essence of who you are, of maybe how we're all connected, how we all share this same consciousness, this same awareness. So this is a bit of a rambling topic. Like I said, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the things worth keeping as a path to renunciation, letting go of certain things. You can kind of get a glimpse of what it is that you're willing to let go of through exploring those gaps in that space and finding it. And that returns me back to the quote that I started with from Ali Tadros, and from this article that she wrote. Again, there's a wisdom to knowing what things are worth keeping. Well, Ali's first album, Ali was, again, a friend of mine from back home. She became a musician and lately has become a brilliant writer. And again, ironically, in this theme of home and the things worth clearing in our own home, she's from my hometown. But her album is called Things Worth Keeping. And again, when I heard her album, but more specifically when I read this article and I read this quote recently, and I was going through the experience of clearing things out for my own space and for my own home, that quote really resonated deeply. And it made me also think about the burdens that hold us back from being our true selves, whether those burdens are thoughts of I can't be an artist, or I can't perform, or I can't be my true self, or I should be a doctor, or I should be a lawyer, or I should earn more money, or I should be X, Y, and Z thing, or I should be more of an exciting person, or I should have more friends, or I should. And I think there's this concept of stripping down all those shoulds to just being. And from that place, it's being yourself and being who you are. And what I got to experience seeing Ali over the years become an artist and become a musician, and now seeing her emerge as a beautiful writer, is just seeing her being herself and allowing that being, that spaciousness, the space of that room, without the burden of the furniture, I'm allowing, or she's allowing that to happen and allowing herself to just be the person that she's meant to be the artist that she's meant to become. And that's been a beautiful thing to observe. And it's not just Allie. I'll link to Allie's work, but I've seen a couple of other friends of mine over the years who have emerged as these brilliant artists. My very dear friend Ryan Cantu, also from Laredo, Texas, also from my hometown, my old roommate from college and a longtime friend from high school. He's become also a brilliant writer and a journalist. He's written a novel, and he just wrote a beautiful article in Texas Monthly about our hometown of Laredo. And I'm seeing him also emerge as this artist, and seeing that part of him that's just flowering naturally, which has really been really cool. And I want to talk about another dear friend of mine, Chibi Orduña, who's a poet and a performer and a podcaster who's also hitting this creative renaissance at this time of his life, where I think he's just allowing, from what I can observe, it seems like he's just allowing the art to flow through him, and he's not allowing the burdens of heavy thoughts keep him down. He's just allowing the art to flow. And that's been such a cool and inspiring thing to see. I think it's one thing to see that from artists who you don't know personally, from musicians or famous artists who seem to have tapped into that source and tapped into who they really are. But it's another thing to see that with friends, with really intimate friends that I've known for years and years, and to see them find a comfort with themselves and seeing their artistry emerge. So I wanted to talk briefly about them and hopefully bring all this full circle between the themes of home, of the things that are worth keeping or not worth keeping, what's worth renouncing, and in finding the gaps and using those gaps as a pathway to knowing that there's something beyond the thoughts or the heavy furniture or the items that keep us burdened down. I'm going to end off here with a little photo essay that I created that was just inspired by the idea of gaps. I read this chapter in in A New Earth, in Eckhart Tolle's book, and I'd been listening to a lot of his talks about the gaps and finding the gaps, and it inspired me to take photographs of gaps and spaces between and white space in my travels recently. And I thought I would share that just as a metaphor and a way of tapping into creativity, of flowing with the moment, and being inspired by the gaps and what comes as part of this process. So thanks so much for the time. It's been really just so exciting and rewarding being able to create these videos for you guys and for myself. I've really appreciated the whole process and the whole journey. And it's nice to be able to reflect on these ideas and share them. So hopefully this was helpful. Feel free to leave a comment, like the video, share it, etc. But more importantly, hopefully that this inspires a moment or a gap in your own life and helps you contemplate the things that are worth keeping and not. Thanks so much, guys.